Welcome to the school committee meeting of August 28th. As every meeting, I would like to remind everyone this is being broadcast live. It is also being recorded for use at a later date, so please keep that in mind. I would ask you to please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Would you also please join me in the pledge of allegiance to the flag? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome everyone. First day of school went off without a hitch. Maybe a bus or two late here or there, but for the first day after the picture taken of everybody getting on the buses, we got it pretty good, so. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of June 12th.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. I'd also entertain a motion of July 22nd, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Superintendent's report?
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. So faculty and staff arrived with big smiles on their face on Monday morning, 9 o'clock, to the Performing Arts Center, where they were greeted by a welcome from the chair of the school committee, Mr. Hayes, a little welcome back from the president of WHEA, Mr. Kafka. Mark Main, a special education teacher at the high school, won the John McEwen Do What's Best for Kids Award. Mrs. McEwen presented that award. And we had a guest speaker by the name of Mike Smith come in to kind of wow our staff. And I think he left a message of, Mike's not your typical presenter. He's 32. He's a nonprofit entrepreneur skateboarder with long hair, came in with his hat on, just didn't fit into the Whitman Hanson teacher crowd. And he stood out like a sore thumb and had a captivated audience for an hour. He was phenomenal, left a good message of how we should be teaching our kids progressively, what he as a CEO and his buddies at Google are looking for in today's student. Talked a little bit about how the average college student is now changing majors 6 or 7 times, and by the time they're 34, 35, they're changing their careers 6 or 7 times. So it's not the, here, teach to the textbook, it's teach to the kid, and he even said, I don't necessarily want the straight A AP kid who's just textbook cookie cutter. I want the kid who's a good person. And he really hit the social emotional learning piece that we've been trying to drive home of being a good person. He said, I can teach good people what I want them to learn, but I can't teach them how to be not arrogant, how to be selfless, and working with the team. So I think he left a great message. Some staff members had great smiles, some brought a little tear, because he shared his story of growing up in Nebraska. And following that, we were treated to facilities cooking, a donated lunch by SJ Services, and an ice cream truck donated by Collegiate Press. And teachers went on their way about 1:30 in the afternoon. Yesterday, they were in their classrooms, and faculty meetings were going on, different activities were going on in the buildings. And this morning at 7:03, the high school was full, no cars in the lane. George and I went to every building. Kids had smiles on their faces. There was one delayed bus in the morning at Indian Head, one delayed bus in the afternoon at Conley. Everything seemed to go out very well. There was not a desperate need for air conditioning as it was cool, but it did get warmer in the afternoon. And then we were met with a little sewage issue in the high school at 2:30 this afternoon, which has been repaired and replaced in the girls' locker room. So on the whole, graded an A-. It was a great day. It was great to see kids. One of the first grade classes at Duval, the first graders had little crowns on their heads saying best first day of first grade ever, and they walked out. It was just good to see. It was refreshing for both of us to get back to see kids, what we do best, and to see our teachers ready to go. Could you tell them that, I asked a few if they wanted to come to tonight's meeting, they had all that energy and they were ready to crash. It's been a long 3 days. I think the open houses at the 3 elementaries were packed. Great positive press from all of them. Mr. Gary Pelletier is the new interim principal at Indian Head. I'll introduce him to you at our next meeting in September. He couldn't be here tonight, but I think he greeted his folks well. Dr. Foley and Miss Downey at their 2 respective buildings greeted their crowds, and I think it went over really well. So opening was a success. Any questions?
Questions?
That presented, Jeff.
Mike
Mike
Smith.
Smith.
Mike Smith, at Mike Smith Live. Follow him on Twitter. He's unique. We've seen him a few times. He speaks to kids. He's got a great message for kids and a very good message for adults. So he was a positive. Do you want me to move right along, Bob?
Keep going.
We did a facilities tour over the summer. Members of the school committee, local cable filmed us. The buildings looked pretty good, no major issues. We were able to recover from the flood at Indian Head over the summer. Classrooms were well put together. The air conditioning units at Hanson Middle School, at Duval, and the ones at Conley were functioning properly. The building was clean. No major things that stood out during the facilities tour. George, myself, and Ernie will have a conversation with David Shea, the president of SJ Services, to just remind him of some of the things that we saw flaws in, contractual things that we want to make sure we have done, waxing of floors and such. But on the whole, summer projects were done expediently within the budget itself. No major headaches that popped out. I think I mentioned the major issue on not facilities, but on 27 and 18, moving the telephone poles over the summer with our fiber optics. That was an unexpected cost that we had to deal with over the summer. But no major curveballs this summer as we move forward. Buildings are ready to go on Monday.
Questions, anyone? Anyone want to comment that took the tour? Go ahead,
It
Fred.
was, it was nice to see and knowing how well-used our buildings are. And some of them were used right up until the point where we took the tour. How quickly they recover and the system that we have down pat. Right down to, marking on right outside the door, how many coats of wax are on the floor, et cetera. So I do commend Ernie and his staff from staying on top of everything. It's a big project, a lot of projects, a lot of moving parts. And if anyone hasn't seen the gym floor,
Yes.
go take a peek. It is incredible.
Gym floor looks better than the first day we opened this building. I remember that. It really does. It looks crazy good. Anyone else?
And the safety project, the thumb latches.
Oh, sure.
Completed.
So, yes, we worked through the summer. Whitman Capital had approved monies, I think, to the tune of $45,000 for thumb latches. We talked about that in the spring to make sure that building doors could be secured without a key, with just a push of a button. A first grader, a second grader, a substitute teacher could lock the doors. In the process of putting them in throughout the summer in the buildings, both in Whitman and Hanson. We did receive a grant for $60,000 for those thumb locks and another additional piece of security. So they were put in throughout the course of the summer.
Great.
Okay. Next up, superintendent's evaluation. Every year, it's the school committee's responsibility to evaluate a superintendent, and the evaluation system has changed over the years. It used to be very, very difficult to do. It has gotten a little bit easier. I'm going to go right through it because it has to be done in an open meeting, and this also becomes part of the superintendent's record. Michelle, when I'm done, remind me to hand it back to you. I see you wrote me a note. Thank you. Okay, step one is assess progress towards goal. The different things you could have voted on did not meet, some progress, significant progress, met or exceeded. First goal is professional practice goal. Met, 3, exceeded, 6. That means 3 people said they thought he met his goals and 6 people thought he exceeded his goals. Next one, student learning goal. 5 people thought he met, 4 people thought he exceeded. District improvement goals. 1 person thought there was significant progress, 4 thought he met it, and 4 thought he exceeded it. This is in step 1 of 3 steps. Step 2, assesses performance on standards. The things that you could put was unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, or exemplary. Standard 1 was instructional leadership. Proficient, 5 people. Exemplary, 4. Standard 2, management and operations. 6 people proficient, 3 people exemplary. Standard 3, family and community engagement. 1, needs improvement. 5, proficient. 3, exemplary. Standard 4, professional culture. 5, proficient. 4, exemplary. That ends step 2. Step 3, overall summative performance. The categories run satisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, exemplary. 6, proficient, 3, exemplary. That ends step 3. I will read you some of the, or all of the comments actually, as long as there aren't a tremendous amount of long-winded ones. Okay. One comment, we need to have better transparency with our budget and documentation for the public. It needs to be accessible for any citizen to view or download from the district site. Received too many complaints from citizens that we have used the data out there and now it either doesn't exist or is less informative with the data. This is critical to have all information available, especially now where we need to have our funding increased instead of decreasing. With an override looming from at least Whitman to hopefully meet our needs for the next 5+ years, and to hopefully restore classes that have been eliminated by lack of funding from both the towns and the state. Despite some very tough budgetary constraints, Jeff and his team have shown great creativity, passion, and energy and diligence in their efforts to move the district forward in all areas with particular acumen and restructuring existing systems for greater efficiency. No comment? Jeff has done an excellent job in his first year as superintendent. Faced with a horrible budget problem, he communicated clearly with all stakeholders the needs and impacts of the budget and did so with incredible professionalism. Jeff has been more than the face of the district. Both he and George are always engaging the staff, students, and community, which is something I believe has been desperately needed. While there are times I sit back and wonder why a decision was made, every time it has become apparent. I have 100% faith in Jeff and George. Like I always have said, it is not the school committee's job to be involved in the day-to-day running of the district. Jeff is doing a great job, and I fully support his work and his efforts to put the district forward, to bring the district forward. Next, overall, Jeff had a good first year as superintendent of the Whitman Hanson Regional School District. Jeff did an excellent job with his transition into the leadership role. There are many management changes, including changes with several principals along with an assistant superintendent. Jeff did a very good job building out his team and setting the tone for the culture and leadership of the district. Jeff also did well meeting his various goals for the school year. His communication with the public and the committee was well done, and his accountability for when things didn't go as expected was also very good. As we look to the future, I'd like to see Jeff continue to work on his development as a new superintendent. I would also encourage Jeff to focus more on community outreach and bring the Whitman Hanson educational experience to key stakeholders such as selectmen, finance committees, town department heads, and the community at large. I would expect the committee to support him in this initiative. Lastly, developing the vision for the district for the next several years will also be a key priority for Jeff. I commend Jeff and his team on a successful year and look forward to working with him in the future. I believe Jeff has done a wonderful job getting all staff to work together, and he has implemented an overall positive working atmosphere. Jeff has won over several people that were publicly against the Whitman Hanson Regional School Committee hiring him. One item I would like to see done better is somehow, some way, and I do not know how, to do a better job selling our school budget next year. Overall, I feel he has done an exemplary job this year. You were thrown straight into the fire right out of the gate and handled it very well. I really like you and George astounding a different staff member, this one's handwritten, every week and highlighting all of the hard work and dedication to the students and district. It is a great way to buy more moral support. You have made an excellent effort to communicate everything really in a way residents can easily understand. Great first year, Jeff. Great first year, morale in the district has improved and is on track for a great second year. This has been a fantastic first year for a new superintendent and his administrative team who have inherited a number of significant challenges while at the same time holding a strong focus to being the best advocate for what we truly believe and lived in for our district, our schools, our communities, and our children. This past year not only came in with challenges for the superintendent, but were compounded with our continuing budget woes, new and more complex challenges to educate our students, and the continual push to keep making our district and our schools better and better. For Mr. Simonak, I think it was a long year, a learning year, but most importantly, it was a year he made the best with what he had, and we actually, in many, many ways, are in a much better place because of his efforts and the efforts he has led us for all of us in the district. I am truly grateful and extremely appreciative of all of Mr. Simonak's work, abilities, strengths, and skills as he leads us into this new year and into the future of Whitman Hanson. There is no way to effectively evaluate a first-year superintendent. In fact, there are many factors outside the superintendent's control, budget being the largest one, and it is unfair to evaluate. That being said, I felt as a school committee member there was a lack of communication in a few areas. I am hoping that this was due to growing pains and learning the job. More specifically, my concerns relate to budget, spending, and general issues. And that is all the comments. Does anyone have any questions for me? I have it all right here. I'm going to give it back to Michelle as it goes into his permanent record. So, as you can see, I put it all back. Mr. Boyce.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to say, and I'm glad to hear George's name mentioned in it. George probably has to have 2 evaluations every year now. You guys are just such an integral team, and I think that's what's so great about what you do and how you do it and how you approach it. George has the answers over here. Jeff's over here. Jeff's really in the middle. That kind of reminds me of the whole Wayne Gretzky. They're not skating towards the puck. Well, one of them is, but they're skating to where the puck's going to end up. And, you know, just thanks a lot. I know it was a tough year. It was a long year. It was a very hard year. If you slept, congratulations. But, you know, it was just good to see that both names were mentioned. I thought that was really cool. So, George, 2 evaluations a year or whatever.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Anyone else before I move on? Okay, thank you. Budget discussion, FY19 line item transfers.
Christine.
You have our handout tonight, and this is the final closeout for June, and there's no change to the bottom line. Just movement, personnel movement, et cetera, throughout the year. And I will report out sometime in November after the DOR certifies our E&D.
You want us to vote the line item transfers?
Yes.
And entertain a motion
So moved.
Second.
to accept the line item transfers as written.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Budget recertification 2020.
So you have another handout tonight that shows the actual preliminary numbers from the governor and then the final budget. So the first one is Chapter 70. We got a slight increase of $37,080. The charter tuition reimbursement actually went down by $40,581. And our regional transportation actually went up by $56,216. So that nets out to a total increase of $52,715. And then you have to take into consider the expenses as well. So that the sending choice tuition went up by $36,205. The sending charter school tuition went up by $51,000, leaving a decrease of $35,332. So in order to balance the revenues and the expenses, we will reduce employee reserve account as of right now.
I would entertain a motion to recertify the Whitman Hanson Regional School District budget at $52,425,738.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Dawn?
We're looking at this document too, right?
Yes.
Right, that's the official
No, you
reading
need
one,
to read
sorry,
it,
yeah. Right there.
But the budget.
I didn't have it.
Certify the
To
budget.
recertify,
The amount says 54 million and the spreadsheet says 52 million.
Yes,
to
it should be
recertify the
52
FY
million.
2020 budget in accordance with the pre-K Whitman Hanson Regional School District Agreement, Section 4, Paragraph D and E, Mass General Laws, small c 72, at $54,425,738.
It should read
Motion made.
52 million. Should read 52 million.
Same as the paper.
Typo.
52,425.
Speech is wrong. Both are same.
No, it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
Hit a 2 instead of a 4.
Okay,
4 instead of a 2.
We wish it was a
so
4.
you want to recertify it at 52?
Yes.
Okay. To recertify the FY 2020 budget in accordance with the pre-K Whitman Hanson Regional School District Agreement, Section 4, Paragraph D and E, and Mass General Laws, small c 70-2, at $52,425,738.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Thank
You
you.
just had a little typo there, Christine?
Typo, yep.
Okay.
So moving right along, our 2020 budget, we're into the school year. One thing as a handout that is in your packet that we passed out today, I mentioned the needs assessment for technology. This is the proposal. This is the company that we're going with, Custom Computer Specialists. The proposal came in at 12.6. They're going to do a soup to nuts piece. This is for your review. You can look at that. If there's something you think that we should highlight with them as they come in, we haven't set up a time yet for them to do this. We wanted to get school going, but I think it's a good look at what we need through our tech infrastructure. And I know some of you folks on the committee have more knowledge in IT than I do. So if you see something that you want us to highlight, please let us know. Paul Johnson, the person we've been working with, speaking with, is very eager to start with us. I think it's a good company. It came from a referral from what school? Bristol Plymouth Agricultural School District, or vocational school, excuse me. They work with him. They actually do consulting. They can actually take over your IT department if necessary. You can contract them out. That's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to see what we have, what we might need, personnel-wise, hardware, software-wise, and we hope to get this done by November, December.
Jeff, is this the first, and I know we discussed it in this at another meeting, of assessing each department?
We're starting.
This is the very
It'll
first.
have a budgetary impact, but we're starting,
Right.
we're starting with technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two things. One, I think this is a fantastic thing to do, and sorely needed. I think they're on the mass bid list,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken, so,
Yeah, they're fine.
you know, pricing-wise,
Yeah.
we're pretty much assured.
We had a couple of different folks that we brought in. We met with them at the superintendent's conference down in the Cape this summer. They gave us a proposal. We decided to go with this company.
Anyone else? Anything further on the 2020?
Bob?
Dawn?
Is this 7 locations?
Yeah, so we
Sorry,
included the
thanks.
preschool as well.
Oh,
Okay, so just, it's its own school now, so we have 7 schools
Even though it's within this
within
building?
this
Yes.
building,
Okay,
correct?
but the scope
The scope
considers
is 7,
that?
correct,
Right, okay.
correct. So that was the first thing I looked at. I
Missing
said,
a
but
school or
they have
something.
They have 7
Okay.
schools, yep. So it has a budgetary impact. I wanted to talk about it tonight. For you.
If anyone has any questions, as Jeff has just mentioned, don't hesitate to call him and George in the next few days. Because as he said, there might be somebody on the committee that has more knowledge than they do of it, so don't be hesitant.
We didn't want to really dig into tech. I wanted a really objective approach to what we might need. So we talked a little bit about an overall look at what we have. But I didn't want to get too specific because then you'd have a bias, you know, you'd be telling them something that might be biased from internal. So I think it's, I'm excited to see what we have and what we might need.
Anyone else? Any budget question? Chris?
So just real quick on this one, I think, and we can talk more about it subsequently, but the information security piece. I know I mentioned that before, and then since then, there's been some somewhat quiet news on some municipalities that have had some significant issues with having their data held hostage and things like that. So I don't know how much that's going to change the scope. I don't know how much that would change some of this, but it might be worth a look just to make sure that from an information security standpoint, we're okay.
So as we process through with this too, I would have no problem with bringing Steve Burke in to talk about our how secure we are. Last year, we had that presentation. I don't know if that information was as delivered as effectively as I wanted it to be delivered. Steve can absolutely do that as we dig through this piece.
Thank you.
Can I just throw something out on that? Just talking with Steve after the fact, because I don't understand any of the security stuff when it comes to the computers. But that may be something, the technology, I know Steve had a concern with discussing some of the security stuff in public.
Sure.
So that might be an offline discussion would be better, because
Yes.
just talking one-on-one with him.
That-
That's why he was vague last
So it's not
year.
on YouTube later on?
Not to put words in his mouth,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of stuff
Yeah.
they don't want out there, if that makes sense.
Understood.
Mr. Boyce?
The virtualization piece, I mean, I know that's a few years old now. How are these folks with that? I mean, is it?
Yeah,
You
so-
think we're starting with a good platform, or?
So, well, one of the things we really wanted to look at is we seem to have a number of initiatives going at the same time,
Yeah.
one of which is virtualization. So one of the things we are going to look at is what is the viability, how is it going, and where are we moving forward? We are going to have to move from Windows 7 to Windows 10 this year. Windows 7 is now, our operating system is completely at end of life. It's sometime in April. So concurrently, we're also building a virtualized platform to be able to accept Windows 10 when that happens. But one of the things we want to look at is, of the myriad of technology initiatives that are going on at the same time, is there one that we should be looking forward to in the future now? Is that still virtualization? Is that the move to the cloud with something of the Google, you know, of Google? So that's one of the things we're looking at. And then we also want to look at, does our infrastructure of personnel support all of the initiatives that we have? Because remember, we have desktop, we have wireless, we have virtual, and, you know, and we have humans who are running it. So that's one of the things that's going to be looked at also.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Anyone else? Okay, any other budget, Joe? Whitman Budget Override Evaluation Committee report.
So I think I can share with you, Don Byers is a school committee member on the override evaluation team committee. We've met, I wasn't able to meet on Monday, so Don can brief the committee a little bit about what was done on Monday. But the mission really is for the committee, and it's a pretty awesome group of folks that are committed to, I think, what's in the best interest of Whitman, specifically Whitman, to see if there's a true need for an override, and what will that be. I think we have a couple of things hanging out there, and I want to almost say like they're hanging chads right now, and we'll get into that under old business. But the group of folks, I think, are committed, are asking some really good questions to see where Whitman can be in the next, 5 to 10 years financially. I know at our last committee meeting that I was present at, we were going to put forth the possibility to the Board of Selectmen to hire a consultant to look at Whitman finances specific. We also, as a school district, approved MARS, our Mass Association of Regional Schools, to do an audit or needs assessment for both Whitman and Hanson to see the viability of what the school district is going to need, so we can report out objectively to both towns through another independent set of eyes. I know yesterday or on Monday night, the gentleman that was approved by the selectmen in Whitman to do the needs assessment was there, and maybe Dawn can shed some light on that.
Sure. Mr. Madden is a recent employee of the town of Duxbury as a finance manager, I believe. He has a long-standing history of working in finance, and really just going to dive into Whitman. My understanding is of, how is Whitman capturing its revenue and expenses and how we can, as best as possible, accurately project out revenue, 5 years. So looking historically 5 years back and 5 years ahead at the town finances, and just help to best decide, does Whitman need an override to keep a sustainable budget going forward? And I liked his reference to whenever he mentions a town budget, he said all ships rise with the tide. So when he says town, he means schools, he means education. Like when he was in Duxbury, that's education's part of that. So he doesn't distinguish regional school versus I'm going to look at the town of Whitman. Oh, and then you have regional schools. I did ask his experience with regional schools. Previously, he worked for Plymouth Carver Regional School District, which was back in the 80s. Carver branched off into Carver High School in 1987. So, but I'm certain he probably has contacts with regional schools, and he's going to probably work with Mars and to get a copy of this report. So.
The great thing about this committee and through the chair, everybody has an equal voice at the table. So the fire chief, Dawn, myself, members of the community have an equal voice to speak and ask questions. And I think that's a unique piece of the committee, that nobody has more weight than not, that every aspect is being looked at in Whitman. So I'll share with you as we progress through. I think there's some unanswered as to what are the finances in Whitman, what are our, I'd be curious to see what Mars has to say. And as we go forward, and like I said, there's our next item could have a tremendous impact on the override and where the evaluation piece is and the needs of the town of Whitman once we get into old business.
Seeing that there are quite a few members from this committee in the gallery, is there anyone want to add or subtract anything to this report?
No.
It's a little bit unusual, but let's do it. We're all working in this together.
Randy Lamartina, 6 Riverbird Circle, Chairman of the Budget Override Evaluation Committee. They did cover it pretty well. Last night at the FinCom meeting in Whitman, the consultant was approved. He will be pushing forward. He's expecting about 160 hours of work time on this project, ideally 6 to 7 weeks. We'll be having a progress report at our September 16th meeting. He has been given Jeff's information. The committee came up with this idea to add another level of transparency, another level of eyes doing an overview, and an independent set of eyes to go along with what Jeff has put forward with Mars. It's a gathering information stage we're at now. If you were to ask me, are we going to push forward with an override? I could honestly say I don't think there is a answer to that yet. I wouldn't say no, and I wouldn't say yes at this point. I would say as a time frame, we originally thought for October. I think early on in our first or second meeting, we realized that could have been a little preemptive, that it'll be sometime after. The town of Whitman also is utilizing the Collins Center to conduct a capital study, which will be part of our override plan. They'll be giving us a presentation October 8th. All pieces we're going to fit together, work with you guys. Jeff will present something in a little bit. Obviously, on the municipal side of it, it's not as many moving pieces. When it comes to the school end, it's going to be working with the school committee, working with Jeff, and also working with the town of Hanson. And that's what I hope to do. So I think, although I don't have any results for you right now, we have made progress.
Thank you very much, and everyone from the town of Whitman and everyone on the committee for joining in, because this is a monumental task and it's not going to be done overnight. Anyone else, committee-wise? Done? Done? Okay. Old business, amended regional agreement update.
So, this is I want to brief the committee, brief the public where we're at. Going back in history, the school committee approved a proposed new regional school agreement in June of 2018. which was put to the Hanson Town voters and approved in November of 2018 and moved in May of 2019 and moved off and not voted upon at town meeting in Whitman in 2019. Some questions around the regional agreement started to arise, whether it was a binding agreement, whether a town could move out in easier than not, but there was an overarching question mark about how the funding was broken up in the two towns, or how the assessment, and we talk about the assessment, was broken up in the two communities. I've got involved, read the new agreement, and was confused by some of the language. In one of the paragraphs of the language, it mentions an alternative method of assessment, and that's the method of assessment we've been using in this district since, I believe, 1991, and a statutory method of assessment, which DESE recommends that regional school districts use. So, started a conversation. A couple of school committee members came in and actually presented me with a document of a recommendation from DESE dated 2007 or 2007, encouraging regional districts to use the statutory method of assessment. And the statutory method of assessment is a little bit different than the alternative method of assessment, and that it takes in the minimum contribution or minimum local contribution. And the minimum local contribution can change year to year, and DESE determines that. And some of the factors, or the factors that they look at in a town, is inflation, enrollment, the wage adjustment factor, property values, income, and municipal revenue growth factor. That can change, or that will change the way, if we use the statutory method, that will change the amount of funding given by both communities. I had Christine do the numbers. I spoke with the interim town administrator in Hanson, because this would affect Hanson, about 3 weeks ago, and Todd, the accountant. Todd was very familiar with the statutory methodology. I met with the Hanson Board of Selectmen yesterday. One of the comments on my evaluation was being a little bit more open and speaking with the selectmen, and I told them that I would see them frequently as we discuss budget. And I told them that this could be coming down the pike. We don't have a binding agreement right now, but the way our attorney, Andy Waugh, interprets the legislation / recommendations from DESE, it says that if you don't have a binding agreement, you default to a statutory agreement. The statutory agreement can swing the pendulum close to $1 million from Whitman to Hanson. So we shared with the selectmen last night. They were inquisitive. They are going to consult with their counsel as well. I'm still in conversations with Andy. Their counsel tended to, as Mary put it, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, tended to agree that if you don't have a binding agreement, you default to statutory, and statutory is the way that DESE has recommended. As I said, I follow the regulations of DESE, and that's what we haven't been doing. We've been doing the alternative method. And briefly, the alternative method is the funding that you receive the prior year stays consistent, and then your assessment goes up in your pupils based upon population to what is needed to make the budget. So last year, we stayed consistent and then went up. This year, we would stay consistent and then go up. The minimum local contribution is different than that they actually look at what a town has done, and this won't come out until January or February, depending on the governor's budget, and they will give us the numbers as I'm understanding. I'm an amateur at this. I'm walking through this for the first time with a lot of information, and I'm not the numbers guy yet. I'm getting to be very solid in this. So I don't want to misspeak, but this, I wanted to share with the Hanson community as soon as possible what could be happening. Again, we don't have an agreement. A member of the FinCom, who was at the selectmen's meeting last night, asked potentially if they could put on to revoke the agreement in a town meeting in November. potentially. So there's some communication back and forth. As the chair and I were there, we left, there were no votes taken on anything. It's all under recommendation and review, and I think it's in the hands of attorneys right now. One thing that I don't really love about the regional agreement is that there are areas that it's gray. One paragraph, it talks about the alternative method. 3 paragraphs later, it talks about, it doesn't mention statutory, but it spells out how the funding should be allocated. I would like it to be clearer, saying this is the method that we both agree on. So there's some play there, but I think it's a legal issue right now as we go into, because it's not a couple of dollars. And it's something that was recommended back in 2007. Mr. Hickey asked for us, and we will pull the minutes of 2007 if we can still find those, of school committee, if that was ever discussed. It was a memorandum sent to, I believe, the superintendent's office back then, and I wasn't in district back in 2007. So I don't know if it was ever discussed at a school committee meeting. I don't know if it was ever discussed outside of that. But it was a recommendation, more of a recommendation from DESI that you should do this, not a recommendation that, you should paint your walls blue or gray. It was a pretty solid recommendation. Our council's involved with this. We're still up in the air as far as a firm decision, but their guidance is saying that you would probably default to the statutory method. So I presented that to Hanson yesterday. Ms. Kemet asked me some direct questions that I was able to answer. But as I said, this was developed in 2017 to 2018, approved by this committee. Right now, we have a 1991 agreement that was voted on by both towns. We have a new agreement that was voted on by one town and not by the other. So we're kind of in lull right now. But there is a dollar amount that would impact both the town of Whitman and the town of Hanson for the fiscal 2021 budget.
To chime in on that, Chris, before I take questions, because I was there with the superintendent. They hadn't closed the warrant yet, so Hanson's going to put a placeholder in for the October meeting to discuss the vote on this. In the meantime, they have directed their counsel, which I forget her name, to look into it too. So I think all towns, it's all up in the air right at the present time, but everybody has been duly notified and duly put into their court of what's going to happen or what could potentially happen. There could be a revote. Backing up a little bit, because I have some history on this and some of the members weren't here. One of the reasons we looked into the regional agreement is because it was this thick, partially typed, partially handwritten, added to, subtracted. It was a 1992 or 93 agreement that was, it had Park Ave School, it didn't have Hanson Middle, it had schools that are closed. So to clean it up before Ruth left was the thought process, is how this got started. It was a mess. This is where this resulted from. This wasn't anyone's fault. This just came out of looking at an agreement that was antiquated to try to clean up the language in it. And this is what we came from. So good things happen. We're going to get this straightened out, and everybody has been duly informed. Chris was first, Fred, then you.
Yeah, so as has been the case since I joined the committee, you're continually learning, and this is just another example. When we were looking at this originally, the DESI website is very difficult to navigate through. But my question is, and I guess I'm looking for some clarification, is as we read the document, DESI refers to a statute, which, as I understand it, is refers to a state law and is, written into the law. And correct me if I'm wrong. So that in and of itself sounds to me as it's something that's binding. That's not so much a recommendation as it is a necessity for a regional school district to follow. I'm just, again, I'm learning as I go here, but I guess I'm looking for some clarification on where the ambiguity is. Because, like I said, as we read it, it looked like it was pretty clear.
So based on that 2007 memo, there are two assessment methodologies. The new regulations, as recently amended, outline two methodologies available to regional school districts for calculating assessments to member towns. The methodologies are defined by CMR 4102 and as follows. And it goes into the statutory method of assessment. And the key points of this: the regional school district prepares its assessment to each member municipality in a multi-step process as follows. The member's required local contribution as determined by the Commissioner of Education in accordance with Chapter 70. Any additional share of the region's net school spending that exceeds the total required contribution, this share is to be allocated to each member pursuant to the assessment provisions of the regional school district agreement. Transportation and other non-net school spending costs allocated to each member pursuant to the assessment provisions of the regional school agreement. Capital costs allocated to each member pursuant to the assessment provisions of the regional school agreement. This is a key point. An annual affirmative vote of the appropriating authorities, and I believe that's school committee, of 2/3 of the members is required. Notification of using the statutory method to the Department of Education is not required. The alternative method of assessment. The calculations of members' assessments pursuant to local options provided in the fourth paragraph of MGL, Chapter 71, Section 16B. Each such assessment shall be the sum of the following amounts: the member share of the regional school district's net school spending as defined by MGL, Chapter 70, Section 2, and in parentheses I, the member share costs for transportation, capital project debt services, other capital costs, and other expenditures not included in the regional school district's net school spending. Both such shares shall be allocated pursuant to the assessment provisions of the regional agreement. Key points, and it talks about some language. All members of the regional school district must unanimously approve this method. A vote must be taken each year to utilize this method. Adoption of this method must be recorded to the Commissioner of Education in the district's annual end-of-the-year pupil financial report. Assessments are annually determined after deducting state aid receipts based upon the provisions outlined in the regional school district agreement. The total assessment allocated for each member is the sum of the following amounts. Point 1, an assessment for categories defined as Chapter 70, Section 2 as net school spending. Separate assessments for all other operating capital costs. The combined sum of all members' assessment for net school spending must be at least equal to the district total of net school spending requirements set, or net of state Chapter 78. We've been using the alternative assessments, but I don't remember us ever taking, or prior to me, taking a vote on this piece of it.
Right.
So that's where we're at right now, is trying to define what we need to do as a committee, as a district, as we move forward in this. And that's the legal piece of it. So the recommendations of MGL, and that's in this regional agreement, because it talks about it talks about MGL, Chapter 71, 16B as the alternative method. And then the 2 pages over, or 2 paragraphs over, it puts into numbers, or into the formula, the statutory method. So this is where we have to clean up this from both communities and from the legal aspect of it, so I can present you budget options or opportunities of the statutory method or the alternative method. Since it's not clearly super defined in the regional agreement as I'm reading it and as our attorney's reading it. However, what the attorneys, so this is what Andy wrote to us. If the new regional agreement is not approved by the town of Whitman, I think you need to use the statutory method. As we discussed several weeks ago, and I read this to the selectmen last night, the way that the language is worded, the default option is statutory unless the parties expressively agree otherwise, or unless they approve a budget based upon a different method. So if the district wanted to use something other than statutory, it would have to get explicit approval per DESI memo, or have a budget approved that's based on different calculations. Shortly after Jeff, you and I spoke with Steve Hemman, and most of the committee members are familiar with Steve. Steve is with Mars. His take is that the new regional agreement, and Steve worked on the agreement with you, contemplates using the statutory method. I asked him whether it specifically states that this agreement, this is the agreement, and he said no. I also asked him why the proposed new agreement references the statute dealing with an alternative assessment option. He didn't specifically address this other than to point out other language in the agreement that is consistent with the statutory method. And he's on retainer for me for more phone calls. So, Chris,
Fred,
as we
then
read through
Robbie,
this,
then Chris.
we'll educate more, okay?
Couple things also, as far as DESI has to approve any agreements, DESI's under the impression that our budget has been done statutory. That's what they have in their records as far as when we file. I guess it's filed somewhere, because I called over there. But also, if you reached a situation where both member towns could not agree on a budget, and you had a super town meeting, the law does state that the only method that you can use after that is a statutory method. And from more private conversations from folks that I had, it's of the opinion that that's all they want to see, so to speak. Just want to add that.
Chris?
No, go to Chris first, because I'm getting more
Chris.
questions in my head now.
So couple things. So my first comment is, my biggest concern here is we're gonna take our eye off the ball. Right, so we spent a lot of time talking about the necessary funding to move the district forward. And this is going to be something that I'm not suggesting we shouldn't deal with, but is gonna take our eye off the ball. So what I would ask is that we quickly spend whatever time necessary, bring in whatever attorneys necessary, bring in whatever spreadsheets are necessary to work through this very, very quickly. Because otherwise, we're gonna spend a year going back and forth arguing over $1 million between the two towns. And when we're done, we're gonna expend all this energy and time and effort, and we're gonna be talking about how we need an extra X million dollars to bring the district forward, and meanwhile, we just didn't accomplish anything. So I'm not dismissing the fact we need to deal with this. My ask is, let's accelerate whatever we need to do to just hash this thing out and put it behind us one way or another, if at all possible.
Robbie?
Can you email us some of that stuff?
Sure.
Because I'll be quite honest, I've heard rumors of this. This is really the first time I'm hearing it officially. I actually heard it from a department head before I heard it from anybody here on school committee. So anyway, and then I've got a million other questions, and it all stems from what Fred was just talking about. So we've talked about, as early as last year, that super town meeting might happen. How is it that we didn't know this other budget formula? I guess is my question. And I know it's brand new for you guys, but I mean, if this happened back 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago, and super town meeting has been talked about many times over that time frame, how, and then I guess with DESI, we're registered or whatever when we turn our budgets in, that this is how we're doing it, and we're not doing it that way. I guess how did this not get caught for 12 years? Is my question.
The way I found out, I had Whitman Selectman ask me, how are you guys doing your assessment method?
Which I didn't even know there was two assessment methods. So
I learned at the same time.
Right.
And I tried to get the answer, and I called DESI directly. You know, how do we do our assessment? What are you showing? Statutory.
That's just my
emailed
question, is how did we
Christine,
not catch it for 12 years?
And I got the same
That's all.
answer back. We're
'Cause
doing statutory.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are in a pickle, and I agree with Chris, because I'll be the pessimist, the eye's definitely coming off the ball.
So
At least for the next 6 months, you know the eye's gonna be off the
I'm
ball.
trying to. Go ahead.
We have notified, both towns are fully aware of this, and everyone has attorneys working on it, and it's
Oh, no,
not
I get
quite
that.
as
I
simple
get
as
that.
it sounds, because Steve Hemming, who came and worked on this, as you just, he spoke with the attorney.
Yeah.
The district said no. You just heard what Jeff read. He said he's not even sure.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of language, I think, that needs to be gone through, but I agree with Chris. This needs to be settled immediately.
So bringing this to the committee, as we were going through, and the issue with our attorneys are during the summer, we have two things going on. We have the water bill in Whitman that I sent to the attorney. Andy was on vacation. The guy who deals with that was on vacation. So back and forth. So in the past 2 weeks, the amount of information that's been flowing in has been decent information. So as soon as we spoke to Andy, because I trust his opinion. I didn't know the other gentleman. I don't want to say I don't trust him, but I've been working with Andy
Yeah.
for over a year.
Yeah.
He's been good guidance. As soon as we found out where we were at, I scheduled a meeting with Mary and Todd over in Hanson, because there's a direct impact to this in Hanson right now. Mary put me on the agenda right away with selectmen. Last night was the first meeting. I know we were going to speak about this today. this has been on the agenda for Whitman in the override committee meeting, and the chair has passed over this until we've had an opportunity to speak.
Okay.
Which I think was very fair, so I could update this committee as well. The moving pieces, I don't know why in 2007, this wasn't brought to say, hey, look, there are two methodologies here, and we're using this. Going back to history, Christine's been here since 2013, 2012 through 13. Sharon Andrews just said, this is the way we do things. This memo came about, and now all of a sudden, we're learning a different piece. So as Mr. Scriven said, you're learning things. Nobody had brought the regional agreement to my attention that there was anything, or to George or anybody, as we went through the budget process last year. From December 12 all the way through May, no sides of the table, we were going through as is, business as usual. And as we found out more, now we're digging in to try to find out as much information as we can to share with both communities, to share with you folks, to make effective decisions. I agree with both the chair and Mr. Howard as far as where we need to be. I want to get this done sooner than later. I don't want to pass this off a long way. Plus, in case it does have an impact in Hanson, Hanson needs to have an idea of what's coming up so they can fiscally prepare for FY21. My concern was looking at it current, FY20. Both attorneys, folks on both sides of the table want to move forward with this. And to echo Bob, I don't think there was any malice of anything. The fact that something wasn't done in 2007 hurts me now as we're trying to go forward. And I don't want to stop where we're moving, but there is a financial implication. And last year, when we were dealing with the difficulties of budget, we were beg, borrowing, and stealing to try to scratch across, level funded. That's where we were level funded, minus 6% in December. I'm really happy to where we got. I wish we could be better, and we'll always strive to do that. But this throws a nut that I don't want to see us derail, but I want to get this expedited. And I can give you as much information and flood you with this via email as possible, so you could better understand that. The DESI pieces, when you call DESI, and I know Fred and I have had this conversation, sometimes they'll give Fred an answer and they'll need a different answer. So it depends on who you're speaking with.
Okay.
Because different folks are, and I know Mr. Scriven called, and he gets a different answer. So trying to clarify, I think I want as clear a document as we possibly can have moving forward through my tenure so that I can look at it and not say, both of us as as building principals lived in gray sometimes. Fair is equal, or fair is not always equal for every kid, and you wanted to do that. When you're talking contract, I want to make sure we're not in a shade of gray. I want to make sure we're black and white, and it can be delegated and delineated efficiently and effectively so that both towns know how to, whether it be buying out of the, getting out of the region if necessary, costs of the region, capital costs of that, and that's what we need to look at in this document.
Chris?
Yeah, I just want to say, this was brought to my attention by a Whitman resident initially, and I sat with her and had a cup of coffee and tried to wrap my head around it, and I honestly couldn't. And then the next time it was brought up by another resident, and again, very, very confusing, and I subsequently went and tried to do my research, and I've told the story a few times. I had all these tabs, and I was referring back and forth, and then all of a sudden, my computer died, right? And so I was like, oh, geez. So when I heard about this and understood the potential impact to Hanson, let me first start by saying this regional agreement really brings us together, and it's our community, right? So yes, we do. You represent Hanson, I represent Whitman, but we are a community, and we're here to serve our community. So my first instinct was to think, oh boy, this is pretty significant. How are we going to get through this as a committee, and how are we going to get through this as a community? So, I just want to, state that and communicate that. My first instinct was to reach out to Jeff and have another committee member reach out to a Hanson committee member, and I couldn't agree more with Chris. We really got to get through this as quickly as possible because we do have so many other things to be concerned with. So that's all.
I agree.
Jim?
Dawn?
I just want to add where I'm coming from on the Whitman budget evaluation committee too. I took an oath and I have a fiduciary responsibility to that committee to make, look at information and not decide, but make recommendations on Whitman's finances and whether we're going to say, yeah, it looks long-term, you're going to need an override based on these numbers, and this number may greatly impact that. Just going back a little bit, I was either watched or I was at that Board of Selectmen meeting, Fred, where the statutory method was mentioned. And I think I was sitting there with nomination papers in my bag for school committee, and I thought, I've been to a lot of meetings, but I don't know what this is, and I better do some research because I don't know what this is. So I did. I started Googling and researched myself, and there's a lot of other regional school districts. You'll find Dennis Yarmouth and Dayton Rehoboth and Dover, Sherburne, Mendon, Upton, that they're working through this the last few years or in the past. So it's been out there. I just hope that we can just do the best for the district. I do want to mention that there's a number put out there as $1 million. It's not, the budget's increasing by that, and I listened to the Hanson Board of Selectmen meeting, and it was mentioned, okay, so Hanson's now paying more, and we have less students, and Whitman's paying less, but they have more students. But it's not about that. I guess I'm trying to phrase this properly. Whitman really is still paying more ultimately in the bottom assessment. We have more students, but it just shifts some of that ability to pay. That's my understanding of this minimum local contribution that comes down from the state. And when it was determined back in 2007, I think they realized different towns have different ability to pay and different, terms of wealth. I did speak at the Whitman Override Evaluation Committee a few weeks ago and referenced the statutory method. It's referred to as a two-step method, sometimes two, because in just in overall terms. So if the total town assessment after Chapter 78 is, say, 25 million, the minimum local contribution for Hanson may be, 9 million out of that 25 million, and Whitman's maybe 10. So the state's telling you this is your minimum local contribution. The town should contribute this first and foremost. So you take that 19 million, say, subtract it from the 25, you're left with 6 million. Then the state says, then you look at your regional agreement, okay? Now you've made a decision as a region to look at your enrollment, 60-40. So you take that remaining portion, I'm estimating, ballparking, 6 million, then you divide that by your enrollment. So you take that enrollment piece, add it back to your minimum local contribution piece, that gets your new. That's how I see this. So, so that's my experience in researching this. My question would be regarding the attorneys. So it's sitting with them, but do we feel that what they would come back with would have any bearing on this decision? I believe it's this committee's ultimate vote as far as the method that we use for the assessment. We've got two options, an alternative method and a statutory, this two-step method. So.
Fred?
Ultimately subject to approval of DESI, though, even though no matter what we vote. But Mr. Scriven, great speech. We need to keep our communities together, and Mr. Howard, I can't agree with you more. The one thing I feel we need to stress wholeheartedly, and just to pluck a number out of the air for the sake of plucking a number, but we know we're millions of dollars underfunded, especially after what we took for cuts last year. And to me, all we're talking about is how we're cutting up the $52 million that we just approved. We're still needing more money to do the proper job. And if we can try and put that aside and build up what we need to bring back and have the right programs and do the right thing to be educationally sound for our kids, that's what I think our concentration needs to be. If the chips end up falling that Whitman doesn't need to spend as much money or Hanson needs to spend a little more or vice versa, that's the net result. But at the same time, we need to concentrate, in my mind, on what our needs are and try and get our needs fulfilled, because all we're doing is not the right service to the kids.
Robbie?
So I guess question for Dawn or whomever. So the state's going to come out at some point and say, here's what Whitman should be contributing, here's what Hanson should be contributing.
Yes.
So I go back to, since 2007, we haven't known this. And I hate to be hung up on that, but why hasn't the state come to us in the last 12 years and said, hey, you're not doing this right? Or what? And that's what I don't get, because the state at some point should have looked and said, okay, if Hanson's supposed to be doing 9 million and they're only doing 7 million, they didn't scratch their heads at any point in time. You know, and again, I'm probably just speaking into the wind on it to hear myself speak on it. But so number one, I'm lost on that. We can let that go because that's in the past. So how do we find out now what, I guess the right way to do it and what Hanson owes for next year? When do those numbers come out?
January, February, it's out of when the governor's Chapter 70 piece comes out, and then.
And it will list each
Then
community
it starts listing, lists each community, correct, Christine?
as to what they're supposed to be paying.
And that's, Desi then comes back and tells us what we're supposed to do? We have no faith in Desi because we call them. I mean, everybody always gets a different answer.
Yeah, but the
Answer-
six
wait a
factors
minute,
that
one at a
the six
time.
factors they base the statutory piece on are established by DESI based on what are in the towns,
What is submitted to the.
what is submitted to the town.
But who gives you the number saying it's 9 million and 10 million? Just to use that 19 million.
Christine,
Well,
Okay.
DESI, but they get it from,
the communities.
Department of
Revenue.
Revenue.
They get it from the DOR.
And Desi's never questioned this yet?
Well, we've always met the minimum local contribution.
That's what it was.
Each town assessment has always been more than that minimum local contribution, but it's the piece above that.
What's the piece above that?
Well, for instance,
And
Whitman,
One at a
I'm
time,
sorry,
guys.
but I'm so confused. It's not even funny.
Well, Robbie, I know where you're going, you know, what you're saying. The key word, I guess, is why has it not been founded before in 2007?
Yeah.
One of the key words you used was government. I mean, where's Christine? Christine, at the end of the year, you file everything that we voted on for the assessments with DESI, correct?
Correct.
Obviously, no one's ever looked this over.
No.
Because if it's been going on since '07.
Yeah, there's 351 communities, so.
So what?
I know, but they get these end-of-the-year reports, and they don't question it. They just don't. The other regions that Donna alluded to, they've all gone through the same process well after 2007. So,
But how many regional school districts are there in the state?
86.
Over 300.
86.
no.
No, no.
West.
That's
West.
what I'm saying.
Right.
I mean,
Wait a minute,
That's what I'm
guys,
saying,
one
the
at a
number's
time, and
small.
Dan's next. Go ahead, Dan.
The point, like we said, we're meeting the minimal, so we're missing a section here all along. The step just above that, because I had no knowledge of this later either.
Right.
I only understood the bottom piece. So if we're missing this other section, I mean, yeah, we have to get this solved quickly. We gotta get our own budget and our own crap together.
That's exactly
You
right.
know, and this is just gonna stymie us. So this has to get fixed, corrected. The lawyers have to come in from both towns, the regional lawyer, and come up with a summation of what we're really supposed to be doing here.
Right.
Because, you know, I don't trust Desi, sorry, never have.
Oh, even less now, because they're
Even
not
less
doing
now
their
because
job.
This is a cluster crap.
Yeah.
I mean,
Fred,
if they were supposed to be doing this all.
Chris,
Two-
Fred, then Chris. Go ahead.
Two things. Number one, as I was told by someone in the government, don't trust anything that we tell you. Get it in writing. Honest to God, I had a question, and that's what he told me. Email it to us and let us
We'll email you
respond
back.
by email. Otherwise, you could get different answers. Back in 2007, they added an income component to the required net school spending in determining what the wealth of a town is. And that's when you started seeing the shift. And coincidentally, that was the last time we saw any significant increase in Chapter 70 money.
Was in '07.
Was in '07. If you look at the required net school spending, and I'm just going off of memory, so if I'm not exact, I apologize. Hanson's somewhere in the 800 and some odd, or 8 million some odd dollars, if I'm not mistaken, and Whitman's 10 million some odd dollars. But Whitman's assessment, of what we pay is 14 million. It's like 3 million more than what the required net school spending is. The Hanson portion of the assessment is just over required net school spending. So that's the amount of money that falls below that line that they say should be divvied up 60-40. We divvy up right now.
No, I got you.
The whole
I got
thing.
you.
So,
Okay.
you know, that's one of the,
All right, no, I got you now.
Here.
Okay. Thank you.
Chris?
So for our next meeting, before, during, after, additionally, do we have an internal resource that can walk us through the numbers of both methods and how it theoretically would look? And so I don't know if that's Christine, I don't know if that's
Yes.
an attorney, I don't know if it's a combination
It,
thereof.
it depends on new business letter A. Moving us out an extra
Sure.
week, you know what I mean? And that'll give us a little bit more time as we got into this, so that we can have someone here, either from DESI, either an attorney, Steve Hemmon, somebody to come in, to come in and walk you through it.
Because at this point, so what I'm not, so two things. One, we have to ultimately understand which way is correct. But I think for us to all start on getting on the same page,
Yes.
let's just theoretically look at whether it's right or wrong. Here's calculation A, and
Yep.
here's calculation B, so we can at least everyone at the table understand what those calculations are. And
Yes.
see those numbers.
Yes. And I have those for FY19 and FY20 already, and then we can walk through that. But in the bottom piece that I mentioned before, when I read out those recommendations or regulations from the state, this committee actually can determine by a vote of 2/3 or unanimous which methodology you're gonna use, the alternative or the statutory. So, I mean, that's here, and by default, and from what Andy said, by default, if that can't come to fruition, it bounces back to statutory. So we'll get some more clarity for you, and for both sides of the towns, both the Whitman Selectmen and the Hanson Selectmen as we go forward.
You're two starting off with a bang
That's
for you,
awesome.
huh?
Yeah, I'm telling you. Great.
What we're gonna need to do, Michelle.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Is the next meeting, and we're talking about changing the date, we're gonna have to have a public hearing on this in the meeting, open it as a public hearing. Okay? And we'll have the lawyers, Hemming, Desi's lawyer, let's get everybody here.
Try to
This
get everybody-
needs to
try to
be,
get everybody as many
I mean,
people as
this
I can.
needs to be
Yeah.
done
Christine Lynch would be the
immediately,
one.
not, because it affects how we move forward budgetarily.
Right.
It has
Right.
serious budget impact
Yep.
for everything that we do. And I agree with Fred, but this needs to get settled first. The pieces that
Yeah,
Fred's
no, right,
talking
you
about
gotta get
adding
this-
back,
Yep,
we've
right.
got to get to that. But we can't get there before we get to this.
Yeah.
This is step one. This has to be a priority. So let's make it a public hearing. We'll open it as a public hearing, and that way we can get all parties involved and move through it. Any other comments?
Sure. I just want to get back to the report that Jeff had approved for Mars to do. This came up on our Whitman committee, but it really is a regional school district report. And it should come in the next week. I thought it might have been Friday. But you talk about minimum local contribution, and this is going to show the trend that it has been in the past and how it may have, might come out in January, because that varies, as we said. But I think this report will be really helpful, and it is for school committees to get a good picture of your member towns and where they are financially, and help us with our budget.
Yeah.
So this will be a good piece at the next meeting as well.
Chris George, 4 Shelley Lane, Whitman. I think some of you guys know this is something that I've kind of seen and been at now for a few years. This came up shortly after the last override that we attempted. Not looking backwards, I know people asked a lot of questions. This is really complicated, but over the last 6 to 8 months, as being part of the Whitman Budget Committee, I took a closer look at it, being sworn in to represent the citizens of Whitman, and maybe potentially recommending an override. I felt like I had a fiduciary duty, kind of knowing that maybe something wasn't right, to look into it a little bit further. So I appreciate the need to go through the lawyers to do a lot of things. I think it's pretty straightforward. There are some things I heard last night when I listened to the Hanson Selectmen's meeting. I think we need to get answers to a few questions. One, regardless of where we stand with the current regional agreement, The 2007 statutory change voided the regional agreement we had in place, right? So there's a clause in that memo from DESI that says, notwithstanding any regional agreement in place, that says, here are the two ways that you do funding, statutory and alternative. So I think it's really important that we get clarification on that. So regardless of whether they vote to take back the current regional agreement or not, it doesn't really change anything. Under the statutory method, the only thing the regional agreement really does is those amounts above and beyond the foundation budget. And I think we're all in agreement that that simply stays split based on population. In order to use the alternative method, I would agree that's what we've been doing. I don't think we follow the procedures that are put in place to do so. Again, oversight, I think it's okay. We're learning these things. I don't think anyone in either town is looking to point fingers going backwards. I think we want to fix this going forwards. Because when you look at the numbers, you know, had this been in place, Whitman would have been able to meet the full request of the schools this past year, right? You know, this amount of money would have allowed us to meet the full request on the assessment that had been asked. So it's really important that we get this in place. Otherwise, you know, based on demographics, based on state aid, these things are going to keep going further and further apart, and you're going to have, you know, one town that's entitled to a certain amount of state aid that's no longer really getting it because we're not taking that into account. So I think it's really important that we, as Chris said, that we move forward really quickly. I'm happy to talk to anybody about what I know about this. I've done a lot of research around it. It is a big swing. It is actually pretty easy to run the numbers. If you look at, there are a number of regional school districts whose budget books actually break down the calculation for you. So, you know, I would suggest even, Jeff, for next budget season, that maybe we copy one of the good ones. I think there's a couple of good presentations out there I think we can use. And, you know, and hopefully, I know this is going to be difficult for Hanson. I do think, regardless of how we approach this, you know, whether there's a request from Hanson to phase this in, which essentially would be an alternative method, whether there's, you know, a need for an override right away, there's a couple of things that need to be done. Not only does the school committee, right, 2/3 need to approve the budget, which means if we want to do something outside of statutory, then Hanson, you're going to need to at least convince 2 Whitman school committee members that we need to use the alternative method, and that they're going to need then to stand up in front of the citizens of that town to vote the alternative method. Because if either town rejects the alternative method, it's null and void. You need unanimous approval. We're a 2-town district anyway. You need a unanimous approval anyway. But I just point that out because the state makes it really difficult to use the alternative method. You know, they really very clearly, I think, want you to use the statutory method. So just something to think about, something to bring back. Like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions on the information that I found out over the past, you know, 6 to 8 months.
Well, Chris, one thing that we're skipping over here is the town of Hanson, you were just saying, and I'm not suggesting this, but the regional agreement clearly states that either town can default and come out of a region. So the town of Hanson might say, we're done with the region.
Yeah,
they can do that.
The one thing I would point out, though,
That's why there's an agreement.
but the way that this budget breaks down, whether you're a regional, right, in the way that the minimum local contribution and the foundation budget works,
I understand that.
whether or not you're a region or you're separate, it's going to be the same funding. In fact, I would argue that based on demographics, Whitman is actually entitled to more local aid. So, you know, if Hanson was to go down that path, they would really need to think about that, because chances are they're entitled to less local aid, and it's probably a worse deal for them to back out of this, right? And they'd be faced with the same situation. You'd be faced with the same minimum contribution that you'd need to meet, the same per pupil cost that you need to meet to reach that budget. So I think, one, that's really important. I think, two, right, we're standing in this building here today. It might be a lot easier to unwind a K through 8 agreement than it might be to build this building and its fair market value, right? But I point that out because I don't think that's a viable option for either town.
I don't either.
I really do think it would be a mistake. But if you don't fix this, I'd actually argue, you know, if you're looking at $1 million and not getting aid, it probably, from a Whitman perspective, really starts to look more attractive on a K through 8 level, right? And I think the statutory method fixes that. It brings it to where it's supposed to be. So
I agree.
I just think that's really important. And I think, as Chris said, you know, the regional schools have brought these two towns really close together. This isn't about going backwards and looking at, you know, what did one town get over the other over the last,
No.
you know, 11 years. This is really about going forward. You know, we're seeing a widening of a gap that needs to be fixed, and this is one of the ways that kind of brings it back together and makes it more palatable, I think, for both towns to
Yeah,
continue
I
to move
agree.
forward. So that's.
Thanks,
Mr.
Chris.
Lynam.
Just a comment.
Frank Lynam, Whitman Town Administrator. Either tomorrow or Thursday, when the Express comes out, there's going to be about 300 posts on Facebook. And I'm going to ignore every one of them. I can say that right now, freely. This is too critical an issue to get sidelined or derailed on.
I agree.
We need to move forward with all due process, and we have to not get bogged down in the blame game. I don't care. Well, I do, but I'm not interested in looking backwards and trying to figure out who should have picked this up. I mean, I sat through a regional funding presentation from the Department of Education in 1994 when we questioned our 9-region vocational school district. And I walked out of there with a headache when they were done. This stuff is fairly complicated, and unless we've got our eyes strictly on the ball at all times, things will be either misinterpreted or not understood. I mean, how many memos do you get a year from DESE? So let's just say what's done is done. We need to move forward. I'm not interested in talking about what's happened in the past. And we need to make a determination of what's going to be best for both communities in the region. So the quicker we work on this, the quicker we'll be able to work on the real business at hand, which is establishing a budget.
Couldn't agree with you more. It's one of the reasons I brought it up, Frank, because I've already had some phone calls from people saying, dissolve this, do this. We have to stay focused 100% on what's at hand and get this solved. 100%, 120%. Anyone else? Randy, and then we're going to move on.
Randy LaMattina, Selectman, Town of Whitman, Chairman of the Budget Evaluation Committee. This is one of the reasons why I felt it imperative to give Jeff the opportunity to get this out there. What we don't need is this misinterpretation, especially for the kids in our district, that this somehow increases the size of the pie. It doesn't. It's going to defer costs based on income and Chapter 70 and things like that that are very, very tough to figure out the exact number. When I first ran this number, I was far below what the number has become now. The formula itself, Department of Education puts out a handout. It's very self-explanatory. It pretty much what I believe you were reading off tonight. It also gives breakdowns of how the formula is done. So it's called Guidance for Regional School Districts. You can find it on the Department of Education website. But again, critical, this does not increase the size of the pie.
No.
The division of it, yes, and that's something people in this room and selectmen and FinComs will deal with. It still does not address the fact of there is a need to strengthen programs in our school, to bring back programs in our school, to work on those social, emotional development issues. It's just a different division of the pie. It doesn't fix underlying problems.
Thank you.
Before we close, Bob, can we just get the tasks that you want for the next meeting? Just so I'm clear who I'm contacting. I'm going to contact our legal. I'm looking at somebody from DESE, potentially somebody from Mars, and Christine and I will present where we're at. We'll present the alternative numbers. We'll also present the statutory numbers, and then hopefully somebody from DESE or Mars will explain how DESE calculates the minimum local contribution. Is that sounds?
That and we have to send invitations of this public hearing to both boards of selectmen.
Correct.
To both FinComs, and making it a public hearing obviously brings that out. Because everybody needs to be 100% clear and concise on it, and what Chris said and what Randy just said. This doesn't increase the pie, this just determines how you're gonna divide it and who's gonna pay. And people need to know that, and they need to be completely clear, so everybody can move forward clear and concise, because I think, as Frank just said, there'll be 300 comments by the time 10 o'clock comes tonight.
Sorry.
And the paper's not even out yet. So does everybody agree with what Jeff said of who to contact? Guys, listen, girls, everybody agree with
Yep.
that?
If something else comes up, if you think
Committee-wise?
something, email me, call Michelle, and we'll get that together.
Okay.
Did the town's council want to be there too?
What did?
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'd get both town councils to come
Yeah.
when we
so
send
we'll
that
be
out.
invited, yeah.
Right. So that way everybody's on the same page and we can end it that night, period, done. As Chris said, and as Fred said, and as Frank said, and as Chris George said, Randy, let's get it out, end it, one night, done. And then we'll move forward from that. Okay, next issue, new business. Proposed change to the September meeting to September 18th.
I'd like that. Now that we have a full agenda for that meeting, to try to get it on September 11th, and actually, I know, just, not that we were planning September 11th, but I know people sometimes take September 11th as a day of remembrance, pushing it out a week now that we have more business to attend to. I'd like the committee to move the September 11th date to September 18th.
You want a motion?
Yes,
So moved.
Second?
discussion? All those in favor? Okay, done. Handbooks, faculty and student. If you look in your packet, there are some changes to the handbook. If George or Jeff would like to go over them quickly, there's nothing that's really,
There's nothing earth-shattering.
Just clean up language.
Clean up language, make sure some dress codes are gender neutral. We have female, male, just cleaning up language. Both the high school, the middle school, and the elementaries did a nice job putting together their books this year. There's no changes except for language to the faculty handbook. So we're just looking for a motion to approve.
Motion to accept?
Second.
discussion?
I have a question.
The
Chairman,
motion to accept is as written
As written.
in your packet. Okay, I have a second. Go ahead.
Jeff, this page 20 added a specific policy around use of electronic devices.
Yes.
Can you just comment on?
Yeah, they didn't have anything in their handbook that said how to use them in school.
This is middle school.
Yeah, that
Yes,
should just be a
okay.
procedure that they had. Basically, it says now that unless for educational purposes as described by the teacher in the room or the administration of the school.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, yes,
Okay?
yes.
Anyone else? Is this to do with this?
The handbook, yes. The high school handbook? Actually, it's a fairly complex issue, but I've been waiting for time to bring this up, so I apologize. The substance abuse, page 50 of the high school handbook, the substance abuse or use policy. Just in a nutshell, and just to start the conversation, I guess now, I guess I'll just say that I believe that a substance use disorder is a disability. And I also believe in special education. And I think if you believe in those two things and you look at the policy, although I do think it's better than most, they put in some good language in there, I do think you'd still feel some tension. Because one, the term substance use disorder, I don't believe is referenced in the handbook. And two, if a child does have a substance use disorder, whether it's from vaping or drinking or opiates or marijuana, a diagnosed substance use disorder, which is in the DSM-5, and then they do show up to school, say, under the influence. From a special ed point of view, we often have what's called a manifestation determination meeting, which is a legal meeting to determine whether or not the behavior is a result of the disability. And if that's the case in the special ed world, then it's not about discipline. The consequences, it's really about support. How do you write a plan to beef up those supports? And I think that's one of the major changes that we should consider. if a child's under the influence and they're on a sports team, and they go before, the counselors, they go through a doctor, and it's determined that they do have a substance use disorder, how then do you proceed? What plan is put into place? And again, this isn't something that could be resolved tonight, but I do think it's something that over time you should consider. Are you formally accepting the handbooks as they're written tonight?
Yes.
I think it would be helpful, or ideally, I think it would be great if you put maybe just some thought into, is there a way that we can add a little bit more language to beef up that section?
So one of the things, and thanks, Mr. Kane, I appreciate that. One of the things, when we wrote this policy, the policy in the handbook is taken from the school committee policies on drugs and alcohol. When we did this handbook a few years back, and there have been no major changes to this, we worked with our Brockton area, what's the name?
Whitman Will?
Whitman Will folks, thank you, to do this. So they were giving us some feedback on how we do this. I think if we move to approve the handbooks as written now, with this caveat to look at this policy from the school committee policy perspective and the high school handbook perspective, we can move forward with that. I'd like to get some more information. I don't necessarily disagree with Mr. Kane. As we look at substances, and we include vaping into that substance right now, and I know that's a hot button issue. If you watch media, vaping's an issue. And looking at counseling students rather than punitive. However, the MIA still takes into consideration a punitive approach to substances. The MIA has not taken they encourage the counseling aspect, but if you're still found under the influence at any given specific time during the athletic season, or depending on school handbooks, there is a loss of competition. But I would take this under advisement. I would still ask the committee to approve the bulk of the books as is, and then give the high school principal, Dr. Jones, looking at his folks in both special education and our counseling services to see if we need to amend this part of our high school handbook.
Based on policy.
Which is based on our school committee policy, true.
I was just gonna ask if there's something we could, plan on following up with at some point,
Sure.
Yeah.
Fred?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we can amend it at any time.
Sure. And we've done that in the past. As things happen, we've amended policy or amended handbooks. We haven't amended school committee policies on a whim. We have had discussions, but we've amended handbooks. I've come to you as the high school principal saying, hey, I'm looking at this and this is an unfair procedure that we have in our book. We need to amend that, or something we've missed in the past, or things happen. So I'd like the committee to do that, taking what Mr. Kane said, and we can, it's an ongoing piece.
The only fear that I have in that is the MIAA who we participate with.
Sure. We would make sure that every policy or procedure that we have in the books is equitable to our MIA commitment, and making sure that we still follow that. That doesn't necessarily, there might be a loss of athletic or extracurricular, but that doesn't mean that a student might be suspended or removed from school due to the alcohol issue. Those things aren't necessarily
different pieces.
equitable
Okay.
or
They
equal.
seem to be doing.
Does everybody understand that?
They seem to be doing some good things too, so maybe it could kind of be in conjunction with what they're doing. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? You understand what the motion is? The motion is as written in your handout. No further questions? All those in favor? Thank you, unanimous. Okay, we have a gift to accept. That's fairly easy to do. Jeff Simonak from Nadine Doucette. Kyle Austin from Austin Insurance Agency in Whitman has provided a donation of $866.36 to our food services department. He would like these funds to be used to pay off all student negative balances remaining at the end of FY19. I'd entertain a motion to accept the
So moved.
$866.36.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Everybody understand?
I didn't quite hear you. It's paying off what?
Pay off all student funds to pay off all student negative balances remaining in the food services budget.
Can we send them a letter as well, thanks?
Yes.
Yes.
As soon as this is approved, I will.
It says, please notify me if permission is for this donation. I was gonna read that. Okay, any further discussions? What a genuine thing to do.
Awesome.
To help student achieve. That's fabulous. I congratulate Austin Insurance and Whitman, thank him. So we should send him a letter.
Yes, absolutely, as soon as this is accepted.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, that was a pretty easy one. There's nothing surplus, and Michelle, there's no field trip.
Not yet.
Can't believe it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, subcommittee reports, insurance subcommittee.
We met initially, we discussed the original parameters. We're going to be having a presentation from our health insurance provider, Mayflower Municipal, on, I believe it's September 23rd. And we're also going to get the folks from the Commonwealth of Mass program to come out and give a presentation so we can look at both programs as well and try and get a grasp of differences and whatnot, so we can make recommendations.
Could save some money there, is what you're telling us.
Perhaps, yeah.
Awesome.
Also, did we get the insurance policies yet? I know you. Okay, so Christine will be distributing to the subcommittee. Oh, perfect. So she'll be distributing our insurance policies. We can take a peek at those, see if there's anything glaring that might help or whatnot, and go from there.
Any questions for Fred? Okay. Warrant subcommittee signings. I entertain a motion to accept 6/6/219.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Discussion? Okay. Unanimous. 6/20/2019.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? 8/1/19.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? 8/15/2019.
So moved.
Abstain.
Discussion?
811? We have one extension. Hold on.
You good? Discussion? All those in favor? Okay.
Abstaining on that too.
Policy Subcommittee, I don't believe they've met.
We probably should meet. I know there was some scuttlebutt going around Mars about marijuana establishments and advertising and having a policy, and I haven't looked up ours to see exactly what it says.
I'll review our policy on advertising. I mean, we redid that a couple years back.
Yeah.
And everything has to be approved through me, from the building principal to me, if there's any advertising. But I'll review that, and if we need to look at something, we will.
That'd be cool. Thank you.
Facilities and capital improvements. I know they met this evening.
We met this evening.
Can I just jump in so Mars actually sent out that there's a 1.9?
$1.9 billion surplus in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts budget from last year.
Correct. Really looking at, so it came out from Mars, send something in to your legislators, to the governor, asking them for capital projects. So I drafted a letter, it's in your packet, outlining our needs. I kind of said where we were at financially, that underfunded and unfunded mandates are crushing us, so help us out a little bit. This is going to go to the governor. I will send it to each of our legislators, both Allison and Josh and Senator Brady. So it's in your packet. You just need to sign it, or sign a copy for Mr. Hayes and for me, that it's coming from the school committee.
You want to send one around?
Yeah.
They're in your packet. Well,
Right.
one, yeah, to sign, sorry, Fred.
Okay.
What?
Or Chris, do you want to start it? Do you have it?
She's gonna start right here.
Oh, okay, Dawn's starting. And if I could just add, Allison Sullivan, I did have direct discussion with her, and while there's been nothing announced in the State House yet, probably due to the fact that everyone's on recess, she is more than willing to help, and if you want to sit down to go over our needs, Jeff?
Yes.
You know, she'd be glad to sit down as well.
Both of our reps have been great,
That-
any contact with us this year, this summer, so it's been very good.
All right, legislative update. No one?
What was that?
Legislative update?
So we have a budget. I don't know, we had one last time, which we just voted tonight, so They gave with one hand a little bit and took away with the other. So nothing really earth-shattering or exciting there. We've got the supplemental to look forward to, and hopefully that we'll have something there. And yeah, Ally and Josh have both been great. Josh was in Alaska, so we didn't speak to him when this came out, but I think he's back shortly, so.
Frank, I apologize. Come on up. When we were talking about facilities and capital improvements, Frank put his hand up and I forgot him.
As Randy Lamatina mentioned a little while ago, the Collins Center has been working on a capital plan for us. We will be receiving a report from them in a joint meeting, which I'm inviting interested folks from the school committee to attend, on October 8th. That's going to be, for lack of a better description, the kickoff for starting a formalized, well-articulated capital plan for Whitman.
Thank you, Frank.
When and where, Frank?
Thank you.
October 8th, it will be in the auditorium at the town hall.
You know what time?
7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay. Pilgrim area, I don't believe we've met.
No, we resume our meetings for the new school year, October 10th.
And believe it or not, negotiation subcommittee is gonna have to start meeting fairly soon because this contract is coming to a close.
We're in year 2, so we just started year 2 of this, so I think that it would be preferential to start, we can start a discussion, see where we at,
After the first of the year.
after the first of the year.
It's by what, October of next that we have to formally be sitting?
I think
You have
so.
to send them a letter
Yeah.
before that.
Graduation.
They need a 60-day notice, I believe, formally. So, okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, the 18th is a big meeting night. It's going to be a public hearing, so thank you all.